Salutations everyone, this is Razor bringing guys another Overwatch video where today we're going to be talking about the meta and what dictates the meta. It's something that, you know, people have been talking about since the closed beta, where things are just flying around, everyone's trying to figure out what's the best way to play the game, and you know, eventually things start to take shape, and there are a lot of things that go into dictating what the quote-unquote meta is. Now there's definitely two different metas, as pretty much with any game. There's the pro level meta, where the best, you know, couple dozen players in the world are playing on one certain set of rules, and then there's the rest of us that, you know, play the game at home, not, you know, in front of a crowd and live stream for everyone else to see. You see this in pretty much any other video game, especially the more complicated ones, where, you know, you might possibly see there to be two separate tier lists because of, you know, lag or, you know, cheese comps or things of that nature that definitely show a difference in what the pros do and what, you know, the rest of us scrubby dubbies do. But there's definitely overlap. The way that the pros play definitely trickles down to how everyone else plays. You know, they see the game being played as an example of the best way to be played, it being played optimally, or at least as optimally as you can see. Even the pros don't play, you know, everything perfectly at the right moment, at the right time, and, you know, throughout the amount of teams, you know, especially when it comes to, you know, team-based games, not everyone's gonna be playing necessarily the same way. But the way that they play is seen by a lot of people, and we want to emulate that. We want to play just as well as they do. But there's definitely differences. For instance, there's quite a few characters in Overwatch that you almost never see in competitive. And we take a look at the Overwatch League preseason, which is the best of the best in the best form that we've seen thus far in Overwatch competitive. Every single character in the game was picked, with the exception of Symmetra. Now, I think someone picked her for like 3 seconds, like before a game ended, for who knows what reason, but she was picked 0.00% of the time. She's the only character that you never saw, you know, come out of spawn. We saw a tiny bit of Doomfist. Every time I saw him, it wasn't working out for their team. Tiny bit of Hanzo. A little bit of Mei, and that Mei was working out a lot, especially on Horizon Lunar Colony. We got to see some Mei play that, you know, might find its way into the rotation of maybe a couple of maps and control points, especially. But we still saw Torbjorn, which, you know, we see people in competitive get, you know, angry about those Torbjorn mains. You know, getting their accounts suspended and yada yada yada. But we saw some Torb have some pretty good success in a very few instances. A little bit of Reaper, that was mostly off of counter picking. Bastion was used almost 2% of the time. Obviously a mainstay here on Junkertown when it comes to the pirate shit comp. And obviously, you know, Reaper and Bastion and Symmetra are used much more in competitive, you know, even at all ranges. You'd be hard pressed outside of, you know, the high levels of playing, you know, half a dozen games and not seeing a couple of Symmetras, because people still seem to think that she works, and especially at the lowest levels, Symmetra really can work because people don't really take the time to take care of the turrets, and Teleporter can absolutely shut down an offense on a 2CP, say, for instance, on Volskaya. If you get a Teleporter up really early and you have a decent team comp at a low level where no one's going to get after the Teleporter or something like that, then they can absolutely win just because that they have that. You know, everyone might be playing at a low level, but with just the one team having a Teleporter can definitely just swing that fight. But the way that the meta is perceived is definitely very fluid, and it's all over the place. I remember early on in Overwatch hearing people in the chat saying to other people, why are you picking Roadhog? Roadhog sucks. Only one pro plays Roadhog, and he only does it, you know, very rarely. And this was, you know, back in Hook 1.0, where it was, you know, every couple seconds, and it could hook through the universe, hook through walls, and could destroy everything. And, you know, he was still, you know, doing massive amounts of damage. Some people could argue that that was when he was at his best. Obviously, I think it's very obvious nowadays, especially if you look at the best players in the world playing Roadhog, which he did see, you know, a decent amount of use. He was picked 12.29% of the time, and getting to see Taimu's Roadhog and a bunch of other people. Roadhog Orisa was a huge combo of tanks that I think we're definitely going to see even more of in the Overwatch League season. And we're just starting to see a little bit of that trickle down to competitive play, where Orisa isn't seen as a great tank, but now we're starting to see her absolutely take over for Reinhardt, who was the mainstay in the early, in the first year or so of Overwatch. Everyone needed a Reinhardt from bronze all the way to professional play, and in the Overwatch preseason, he was picked less than 5% of the time. You know, the meta has changed with all of the balances, and, you know, D.Va, Winston those are the two tanks. They were second and fourth most picked characters throughout the entire preseason. Mercy obviously being the first one, which we'll get to in a bit. So the nerfs and the challenges and the new characters coming in obviously affects the meta. But the way that things are perceived by the general public definitely change the way that the game should be seen. We should see the highest level of play as the example, not some gold or plat or masters or grandmasters players doing what they do, whether they solo queuing or they're six stacking. Because there's a lot of randomness and lag and cheese comps that people are trying to run, people throwing, people sandbagging for their YouTube and Twitch channels. So there's definitely a lot of crazy things at play when it comes to us regular people out here playing the game. And, you know, Mercy ruled non-pro levels of play. She was the most picked healer by far, especially in the lowest levels of play, and this was before she became a god tier must-pick Mercy Watch res meta that we are in today, and were even more so before she got that tiny little nerf. But nowadays, Valkyrie is just the strongest thing in the universe, and her tempo res, she has two reses, and one of them's on cooldown, and the other is the best freaking ult in the entire game by far, and is the most important thing, and is why she is by far the most picked character in the Overwatch League. But before that, at the lower levels of play, for us scrubby dubbies, she was the most played healer, easy to play, big res valley, can swing a team fight, even though that was, you know, a small percentage of the time that we ever saw Mercy. But she wasn't Lucio, which was ruling, you know, the competitive play, picked almost 100% of the time, and even in, you know, certain circumstances was picked 100% of the time. And then Ana came out after her buff and was an absolute must pick at the highest levels, but at the lower levels, not so much. It was all Mercy. So there's definitely a lot of differences and discrepancies there with how the pros play and how the regular Joes play. And we can see that mostly with Roadhog, how he has been perceived by the general public and how we saw him in competitive play, because back in the old days of the Hook, Roadhog wasn't used that much. It was Reinhardt, you know, Winston, you know, we saw some D.Va, you know, based off of, you know, the changes that she made. She fluctuated up and down. Some Zarya play in there as well, and she hasn't seen so much love right now, right just barely above Reinhardt at 4.62% picked in the Overwatch League preseason, although we did get to see a couple of those Gravitons win team fights and close out a round or two. But, you know, at the lower levels of play, picking a Zarya isn't deemed as much of a throw pick, you know, if you will. Not that she's seen a throw pick when a professional picks her, but I think you definitely, you know, catch my drift when I'm saying how us regular Joes play and how the pros play is very, very different from one another. And we got to see that with Roadhog, because the pros weren't using him as much as we were back in the old days before the rework. And even after his most recent buff, which was, a few months ago by, now. But after the nerf and everyone started going up in arms, oh, I can't flank Hog, I can't one-shot everything in the world, and they were totally undervaluing how much power you could get out of one-shotting, one-hit, one-shot hook combos, because they just weren't playing the character right because he became a little bit more difficult. But nowadays, Roadhog is stronger than he ever has been, but it's taken the public a long time to catch up to speed. I remember it was like a month after the buff, after the big nerf, he got, a buff to, make him usable more often, being able to move while healing was a big thing, and became the tankiest of the tanks. A month ago, or a month after that buff, I saw Josh Petersdorf, the voice of Roadhog, and tons of fans coming up to him going, man, I hate what they did to your character. He's so useless now, blah, blah, blah. I hope they buff him. And he was like, no, Roadhogs, we're coming back. We're good again. And it's taken, until recently for people to kind of catch up to that idea that Roadhog at his present moment in time is the strongest that he's ever been by a lot, and you see that exemplified by the pro levels of play. Tracer is a character that has gotten zero changes whatsoever, so her pick rate has gone up and down based off what the meta is. People back in like the triple tank days, you didn't see nearly as much Tracer, and Genji was pretty useless against triple tank because you just couldn't do that damage output. But, then the dive meta comes out and it's, Tracer Genji. That was what pretty much everybody was running. And when it used to be Zarya, Reinhardt, maybe some Winston gets a buff, D.Va gets some nerfs and some buffs, and now it's strongly cemented as D.Va Winston in the pro levels of play. Those are the tanks that you use. D.Va was picked 84.4% of the time, and Winston 78.78% of the time. So we definitely get to see a huge discrepancies depending on how characters are perceived to the regular Joes, because we saw the buffs to Winston, but we still don't see as many Winstons. They aren't picked 78% of the time in Masters or Grandmasters yet in Pro League, where everyone's playing to the best of their abilities and has communication and all that stuff. You get to see the sheer power of Winston buying space and able to carry, and people seeing XQC at the Overwatch World Cup winning MVP, and the power that Winston has, and very much being cemented in the meta with Mercy, D.Va, Tracer, Zenyatta, and now Widowmaker. Widowmaker was the second most picked DPS in the Overwatch League at 22.91%. And prior to the World Cup, we would see some Widowmaker here and there, but the high levels and the low levels, you didn't see much Widowmaker. She was seen as a throw pick because she's very hard to use. And if you are good enough to hit a certain amount of your shots and hit really good and difficult and safe shots, then she can be amazing. That's, always been the case. But what we got to see Flower do with Widowmaker in the World Cup, and now with Overwatch League with Taimu and Fleta, and, Widow was a character that every team needed to have. Everyone needed a Widowmaker. And we've seen that very recently develop, especially ever since the World Cup, that you need a Widowmaker in certain circumstances to take the first point very quickly, to duel the enemy Widow, because that's really the best way to take care of a Widow, is have a better Widow on your team. And we got to see a little bit of give and take play of that in the Overwatch League preseason, but you'll never see Widowmaker as the second most picked DPS character at Grandmasters, Masters, Platinum, Diamonds, Gold, Silver, Bronze. You'll never see that, and you never will. Genji is still the most picked character when you take a look at all levels of play in Overwatch. He's number 1, Mercy number 2. I don't know, what the gap is right now, but you'll see Genji the most in Bronze, Silver, Plat, Diamonds, Masters, Grandmasters, top 500. I know you'll see a lot of Tracers, you know, in top 500 as well. And you know, even in arcade modes, you'll see Genji picked the most in a lot of those circumstances where people have control over what they pick. But Genji, you know, still very, very much used, but, you know, he hasn't seen a ton of changes. He's had an insane blade that got, you know, nerfed down in time a little bit, but now we're still seeing the same value getting out of that. We saw Gladiators going triple DPS on attack on Numbani, and we got to see Genji get some crazy, insane multi-kills to win team fights. We saw a lot of Soldier in the Overwatch League, and Junkrat. Junkrat is a huge example of people misperceiving how good a character is. You know, he used to be the only character that had never been in the meta, like ever at all. And now he's as meta as they come, pretty much. You know, he was the 5th most picked DPS character behind Tracer, Widow, Genji, and Soldier, and was just ahead of Pharah and ahead of McCree. And we got to see in the Overwatch World Cup, what was Jake doing with Junkrat, taking out that South Korean defense on Hanamura. Just a lot of circumstances, people need the Junkrat to do that burst damage, to take down barriers, to take down heavily fortified, controlled corners that Orisis are setting up, and Junkrats can just blow down those barriers down, CC a lot of people with those mines to kind of spread them out, get those traps down, maybe get a kill or two, and get in people's face. You know, after the buff, the first buff to Junkrat, which allowed him to not take damage to his own explosions, that was a relatively big deal. It allowed us to get those one-punch combos in, you know, get up in their face, one grenade, one mine, it was done. That was a lot more consistent because we didn't have to worry about damaging ourselves anymore. And in the regular Joe level of play, from bronze to from top 500, you know, to bronze, we didn't see a very big increase in Junkrat play at that point. But at the competitive side, take a look at what Flower was doing with Junkrat before his big buff, before he got the 2 mines. Flower was using Junkrat, and people were really impressed. It was destroying the Doomfist, which had just come onto the scene, you know, before his nerfs, and was crushing it very well, but for a very short amount of time. Junkrat was a very easy answer to that, and it nowadays is just completely shuts down Doomfist, who was the 2nd least picked character in the Overwatch League preseason, getting picked 0.5% of the time. And, you know, even with the buffs that he has now, and even if he gets more buffs, Junkrat is still a very easy way to counter that. And people are talking about nerfing Junkrat, maybe having his grenades bounce less before they detonate to get rid of the spam viability. Because at the regular Joe level of play, Junkrat is humongous because of his spam. But how much did his damage actually increase? All he got was an extra mine. Now, people thought that if he got an extra mine that they would be reduced in damage, but that didn't happen at all, and we might see that happen in the future. But for the time being, what we have now is 2 fully powered 120 damage mines, which is crazy. But all he didn't get a change to his primary fire. Yes, he got a speed boost to his ult, which people, you know, the top 500 Junkrats out there were like, Junkrat's in a really good place right now before his buff, but I would like to see his tire get buffed. That's the only thing that needs to change about Junkrat. And he did get that tire buff, but he also got an extra mine, and he didn't get reduced damage to that mine either. But his primary fire is the exact same as it was in closed beta. And Junkrat was a character that I liked playing from, you know, from the open beta, you know, until like season 2, where I had to play tanks and healers all the time because people had figured out the game, and you know, you need tanks and healers. You can't just, unless people were picking Reinhardt and stuff like that. But Flower was showing everyone in the world what Junkrat was capable of, and then the buff came out, and a lot of people were picking up Junkrat, and he becomes a huge part of the meta. And Bastion was the god for a couple of weeks, and then they toned him down, and then he disappeared. So he was, boom, we were in a Bastion meta for a few weeks, and then he gets nerfed, and then he's gone. And then Junkertown comes out, and it's pirate shit, baby. So many people in in competitive play that that I've played with, we go up against a Bastion, and they say, so once we lose that defense or attack, whatever it may be, once we flip-flop, once we go from attack, defense, or defense to attack, people are like, all right, we need a Bastion because that's what they did. So many people are trying to mirror what a winning team did, and this is definitely a holdover from competitive, which I think is at detriment to some Overwatch League teams. If they haven't practiced the pirate ship, then they aren't going to be able to get as much. You saw this with the Gladiators going up against the Spitfires. The Gladiators threw out the pirate ship and were able to crush on Junkertown, but the Spitfires couldn't replicate that because they always went for the mirror match. That's what the pro level of play has always kind of been. What's the best people doing? Let's copy what they do exactly. Instead of trying to figure out a better way to do things or a different way around things, playing to their strengths, which I think we're starting to see. Some people are picking up Widow, even though they're not best at Widow, but the demand is kind of there for it. We need somebody to get on that Fleta or to get on Taimu, or back in the Overwatch League, we need to change the way that we play because Flowers Widow is taking us down here on Onamura, so we have to take a different angle of defense. So it's changing positioning, it's changing character picks, and we're starting to see more viability in more characters now than ever before. Like I said, we saw every single character being played in the preseason, the highest levels of play, with the exception of Symmetra. And with the exception of Doomfist, and I didn't get to see much Hanzo, but he was picked, almost 1% of the time, which isn't very much at all. But the next two least picked characters, Mei and Torbjorn, when I did see them, they were doing their job. They were helping the team win, and in certain circumstances, were key in a team's victory and winning a round. So, Reaper isn't going to be great everywhere, but in certain circumstances he is. Bastion isn't going to be great everywhere, but if you're on Junkertown, Bastion is the end-all be-all because of the pirate ship meta on that map. And people are going to have to figure out a way around that instead of just copying it or just try to do it better. So, the pros are still learning. They haven't figured out everything yet. We definitely got to see a lot more Sombra play than I think a lot of people were expecting. Yes, we didn't get to see as much Ana play as maybe some people thought or wanted. Everyone wants to see Ryu Jaehong on the Ana getting crazy plays, but Mercy is just so strong right now. And that is sort of a very obvious thing for people to pick up. This is still the Mercy meta. She's still a must pick, but Widow, we're starting to, the regular Joes are starting to see the impact that she can make, but it's the skill that will make the differences, whether that is seen more often, and obviously the communication and, playing on a LAN, it definitely makes a big difference. But the way that the regular Joes see things and the way that the top players in the world that are paid to play the game see things are vastly different. Both groups are kind of playing catch up to the way things are, and Blizzard is also playing catch up. They're over buffing some players, they're over nerfing other characters, but they keep making changes and adding additional characters to play to the strengths of a meta that's really not strong right now, or countering a certain playstyle, seeing what the game needs and putting that in. Orisa took a while for people to realize, but she was the character that we needed at the moment. We didn't see a ton of Moira in the Overwatch League, but you take a look at competitive play, she's one of the most picked characters. Because of what she can do at the choke with her balls, and her ult is one of the best pushing tools at, especially at the lower levels of play. But at the top level, people are still trying to figure out where Moira best fits. Sometimes we saw her in very good circumstances, and other times where it's like, maybe you should have had a Lucio there, or maybe you should have stuck with the Zen or whatever. But everyone's learning, and we're all trying to figure out what's the best way to play this game that is ever changing, with the nerfs and the buffs and the new heroes coming in and the new maps coming in. Everything makes a difference, and more things are meta than ever. And, people want to see changes to Symmetra to make her more useful. People want to see changes to Hanzo to make him more useful. And people want to see Doomfist maybe at least come back to where he wasn't dominant but useful in certain circumstances. And while the meta definitely doesn't play well to a Doomfist right now, you're starting to see him more in higher levels of play nowadays. And those glitch bug fixes, not really a buff per se, but those bug fixes definitely helped him. And we all want to see the most amount of characters be used as possible in a very competitive manner. But we also have to reflect and see that Overwatch has made the largest percentage of their roster part of the meta, whether it's, at any time or at the current state of the game, than any other character that, the competitive team game that you can name. So many characters are meta right now. A lot of it's map dependent, a lot of different comps going into things, how you run the triple DPS, what 2/2s do you use and on what map, when you use Sombra as your off healer and getting those pulse, those huge hacks, when you use Roadhog, when you use Ana. And it's exciting, but people kind of have to learn a lot more about the game and how it should be played in all different team comps, on all different maps, and at all different levels. So those are just my thoughts about the Overwatch meta and how it is dictated. There's a lot of things that go into it, a lot of misinformation, a lot of bandwagoning, whether it's one way or another. Mercy got buffed. Everybody realized how great she was. She gets nerfed. A lot of people fell off the bandwagon, and till this day, she is the most used character at the highest levels of play because she's the best character in the game. And whether the meta shifts away to counteract that, and Widow is definitely a response to the Mercy meta that we're in, but Blizzard might also make their own response to make her not a must pick, but still part of the meta. And I think that's what we want every character to be.